Hello everyone, it's Jonny Khatru, and today I'm going to be listening to the self-titled debut album by Almendra from 1969. Almendra was the first successful band project from the amazing Luis Alberto Spinetta, who went on to perhaps even greater success with his next project, Pescado Rabioso, only to go full prog rock in the early 70s with the band Invisible. This was all part of the early rock en español movement in Argentina in the late 60s, early 70s. As far as I know, he went on to have some pretty big pop hits into the 1980s, which gave him a lot more exposure across all of Latin America. And for that reason, Spinetta is a very well-known, well-loved and respected musician in this part of the world. So as you can tell from my accent, I'm an Englishman. But several years ago, I married into a Mexican family. I now live in Mexico. So I've been slowly learning Spanish over the last few years. And of course, I've heard plenty of rock en español, rock in Spanish. The first time I heard Spinetta was as part of the prog rock band Invisible. I'm very passionate about prog rock, so over the years I've listened to a lot of prog rock from all over the world. And I discovered Invisible quite a long time ago. But it was only a few years ago I really got into the band, and especially their album El Jardín de los Presentes, which is an incredible album. I've given it a 4.5, a 9 out of 10. It's honestly one of the greatest prog albums I've ever heard. I had actually even heard some prog rock in the Spanish language before Invisible. I remember hearing El Patio by Triana and an album called Veneno, both from Spain. As I remember, they fall more under something called Andalusian rock. It's more influenced by Spanish culture. So perhaps Invisible was the first Latin American prog rock I had heard. And of course, since I loved it so much, I wanted to hear more from this guy, Spinetta. One of his more famous albums is the Pescado Rabioso album Ataúd, which I understand is also considered to be more or less a solo album of his. And that album also blew me away. It's obviously not a prog rock album, but it's still a very unusual sounding album. It's very interesting, but also very beautiful. That's the thing about Spinetta. The stuff I've heard of his has been always very beautiful and with a lot of depth if you are willing to dig into it. But today we're going even further back into the late 60s when it seems he was making blues rock with his band Almendra. Almendra has been on my radar for a while, obviously because of my interest in Spinetta growing, but it was also recommended to me by my good friend Roy. And then recently I've been watching the TV show on Netflix called Rompan Todo, or Break It All, which is a history of rock in Latin America. And in the second episode they covered Spinetta quite extensively, and particularly this debut album by Almendra. So this seems to be the perfect time to give the album a listen and let you know what I think of it. In this video, I'll be giving you my initial thoughts after my first listen to the album, and then at a later date, I'll do a follow-up video with my final thoughts and my rating. So don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss it. All right, let's give this one a listen. Almendra. No hables más, muchacha, corazón de... So I just heard the first track, Muchacha, and that wasn't blues at all. It wasn't what I was expecting, but in fact it was more reminiscent of what I've heard him do before on the Pescado Rabioso stuff, more of a folk tune than anything. But I really enjoyed it. A really great way to start the album. Really beautiful and immediately memorable melody with some nice interesting chord changes. Track 2 is 9 minutes long and it's called Color Humano. Maybe we can expect more of a blues jam on this one. So that was Color Humano. And at the beginning I was thinking, oh, this is still more folky stuff. But it had that kind of a slightly dirty edge to it. And you could feel the blues coming in. And sure enough, we ended up with something like a 5-minute blues jam in the middle of the song that returned to the more folky tune at the end. I loved the sound of the distorted bass all throughout the song, and the actual tune itself was really nice. But obviously they were aiming for something more, like all the great prog bands of the time. They were working in the formats they had of pop, rock and blues, but they were reaching for the sky, trying to push things to the next level. But yeah, overall, I'm quite surprised by how psychedelic the whole thing feels. It's got that magical feeling that you would hear on Spinetta's following projects already, which I'm very pleased about. So the next song is called Figuración. Sounds like Jethro Tull.
Si vas a perder tu amor.
Okay, Figuración. So if I haven't mentioned yet, the production on this is very rough. It has that 60s underground rock sound with lots of distortion whenever he's too loud. But it works for the atmosphere that they're making. There's a very psychedelic blues kind of, or psychedelic folk even, sound to this album. I love the flute. It obviously reminded me of Jethro Tull and the way they were combining rock and folk with the sound of the flute at the same time as this was released. But they were using it in a really interesting way that was emphasizing the unusual chord changes. And I also really enjoyed the unusual structure of the song. There were a lot of unexpected changes considering it was only a 3.5-minute tune. But yeah, really interesting stuff. The next song is called Ana no duerme. Ana don't sleep. Ana no duerme. Wow, that was even shorter than the last song and yet still managed to have these very unexpected changes. It was mostly a very upbeat, driving, very memorable and catchy tune. I almost feel like this one could have been a hit single if it weren't for some more unexpected changes halfway through the song. It kind of went into this more epic section and then into this proggy fiddly section and then right back into the tune. All of this happening very quickly. Very interesting stuff. The next song is called Fermín. So that was Fermín, and that was one of the less unpredictable tracks for me. Although I guess it did surprise me with that harmonica suddenly coming in right at the end. But yeah, it was a nice enough tune. It kind of gave me on the beach on an island kind of vibe. The title of this next song starts with a word I don't know, but I think it's Plegaria para un niño dormido, something for a sleeping child. Here we go.
Que siga soñando.
That was beautiful, really beautiful. Spinetta seems to me to be a master of interesting chord changes. He seems to have an understanding of music that of a jazz musician more than anything, which obviously fed into his later work with 𝐿𝐷𝐵𝐵𝐵. I just loved all the clean guitar lines and piano lines all over this song, and his singing so passionate. It just all fed into the really deeply musical sound of that track. I loved it. Track 7 is called estos, hombres, tristes, to these sad men.
Manos, pero no se ven.
Wow, that song was doing all kinds of things. Straight out the gate, it had these strange rhythms, some tempo changes, but what ended up really selling the song for me was Spinetta's singing. It was passionate. They're reaching for this epicness, and at times in this song, they're touching it. It was getting there, and then between the epic parts, there were these beautiful jazzy moments with really great lead guitar playing. Yeah, that was beautiful, wonderful. We're on to the last couple songs now, which are just two short ones. The first one is called Que el viento borró tus manos. Even more jazziness in that song. Wow, really impressive stuff. This song even had so much swing and groove to it. I mean, made me want to dance. Even more tasty flute playing. I loved that. There was just so much confidence in all of the performance on this song. It wasn't the strongest chorus, I didn't think, but I loved everything else about it. So just the last song left, and it's called La hora va.
Laura va y el dolor se fue con sus bocas.
That's a beautiful way to end the album. It kind of reminded me of Good Night at the end of the White Album of the Beatles. And you know, although I would say this was much more sophisticated than that, there was a kind of magic, an old magic in it. I guess also something that you could say also the Beatles did is it had this kind of Disney magic, you might say, like Disney of the early 1900s, which is something the Beatles would use and the other English prog bands would also go on to make a big use of. As I said, a great way to end the album and another really strong vocal performance by Spinetta. So overall, the album really impressed me. It surprised me. I wasn't expecting something so ambitious. I mean, this is almost levels of In the Court of the Crimson King levels of ambition at times. Maybe not quite that level of hugeness. It definitely still had 1 foot more in the 60s sounds, especially with its blues influences. Although those were much less pronounced than I was expecting. It was much more headed in that mysterious, folky direction that I love about so much early prog rock. In many ways, I would file this under proto-prog in the same way as some of the Moody Blues and Fairport Convention albums that were coming out of England at the time. But this is obviously already with the magical songwriting and performances that Spinetta would become famous for. He already had that magic even at this early stage. So that surprised me and I loved the album for it. It was really something special, actually. We had elements of folk, blues, jazz, all with this layer of psychedelia over the top of it. And as I said before, always reaching for an epicness that in several songs they did touch. So now let's take a look at what some people are saying over on Rate Your Music. So we can see here on the Rate Your Music page for the album that it has a rating of 3.72. from 1,800 ratings, which is not bad at all. The album's considered a psychedelic rock album, which I guess makes sense. I'm glad to see progressive rock there in the subgenres, because like I said earlier, I really felt that it could even be called a proto-prog album. So the highest rated song is the first song, Muchacha, which, as I recall, was a very pretty and quickly memorable song. I wouldn't be surprised if it's one of his more well-known songs. I'm not really aware. I'll need to ask my friends, but obviously it's a well-liked song. But on the whole, I mean, all the songs have really high track ratings, especially some of the more ambitious ones like Estos, hombres, tristes, which was a really interesting track. This guy 1.5 said, es una cacofonía asquerosa cuando alza la voz, which I think he's talking about what I was saying during my listen, where the production is such that when he sings loudly, it distorts, which is quite rough. It is quite rough, so I understand why you'll feel that way. But as I said, I think it worked okay. You know, it was good enough, and it just gave the album an atmosphere of the time. I see B-Fly-Gelt said, thank you, Flylo. I suppose Flying Lotus must have sampled something from this album. I'll have to look that up later. I'm not aware of it. This review by Phallus Day mentioned Though Spinetta was just 19, I believe, he's already a formidable presence, offering a silky vocal delivery that excites you and makes you want to cry at the same time. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I was surprised by just how already developed his musical personality seemed to be on this album. Everything I've loved his later albums for, I could already hear it on this album. And also the variety of sounds and styles that he's trying on it is really impressive. The review of this user Thrental said, the abysmal album cover almost takes away from the fact that this is a rather competent, warm and psychedelic prog rock trip. Yeah, I mean, it's not the best album cover, to be fair. I didn't really know what to expect judging from the album cover. I suppose I was just trying to make sure it didn't affect my expectations too much. I mean, it's fine, but it doesn't necessarily give you an indication of how beautiful and epic the music is going to be. The songs tend to delve into a forest fairy brand of folk prog rock that I'm not so keen on, but it's hard to deny that they give it their all in these performances. Yeah, I mean, I agree with that, and it just so happens I am quite fond of that fairy brand of folk prog rock, so it worked very well for me. I'm really happy with how impressive this album turned out to be. I was expecting something a bit more humble from the beginnings of the career of Spinetta, but instead I got something ambitious, creative, and really quite enthralling. I look forward to listening to the album a few more times before getting back to you all with my rating. And I'm looking forward to hearing more from Spinetta, more albums from his various projects, especially the 2 albums of 𝐿𝐼nvisible that I haven't heard yet. I'm looking forward to hearing those very much. Let me know down in the comments what you think of this album. If you already knew it before, let me know what the album means to you. Please leave a like on this video. Don't forget to subscribe. And until the next one, take it easy.